Welcome again to another episode of Niger Innis Presents The Trump Revolution, a part of the TvAbraham network. Well, folks, today we have a terrific guest on. His name is Craig DeLuz. He's the founder of Uncommon Sense Media Group. He has been in advocacy, media, writing, a journalist, political analyst, and grassroots activism for close to 3 decades, close to 30 years. He doesn't look it, but he has been in the war, if you will, for close to 30 years. He's also a spokesman for the California Republican Assembly, the Golden State's largest and fastest growing Republican volunteer organization. And we could spend the whole half hour just discussing your bio. But one thing struck out to me, Craig, in particular, is the fact that you served as the spokesman and senior legislative advocate for the Firearms Policy Coalition and as CEO for the Frederick Douglass Foundation of California. That struck out to me very personally and very emotionally because as you know, we lost a great leader within the Frederick Douglass community, Dean Nelson, a couple of years ago. And I'm sure that tragedy hit you as a young man, probably around our age, if you will. And he died way too young.
Well, I would say the same thing. Timothy Johnson before him, who was the head of the foundation. I'll tell you, it's an organization that is doing so much nationwide in order to help educate people on the principles of Frederick Douglass and really help people to understand how integral he has been in seriously the first true civil rights activist.
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. And they were both great leaders and a great loss to the movement. But their spirit and their efforts and their works live on in you and in supporters from me, like me. So it continues to move forward. And it's interesting. Let's stop with the introduction there, even though I should say that you are a columnist and people can see your writings in various periodicals, but in particular the Daily Signal and the Sacramento Observer. But let's start with Frederick Douglass, because that's a nice dovetail to our discussion today. A couple of weeks ago, Governor Moore, the only black governor in the state of Maryland, vetoed a slave reparations. I think it's more of a study bill than anything else. I don't think it has any specific pronouncements, but it's a study bill. And he vetoed that bill, even though it passed the legislature with a veto-proof majority, or super majority. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, okay?
Okay.
Question number 1, do you agree with the veto by Governor Moore? Question number 2 is, are there some perhaps cynical reasons, political reasons, that Governor Moore vetoed the legislation? Because as we know, he's a Democrat, and a lot of Democrats pussyfoot around the issue, either pussyfoot around or outwardly support reparations for slavery. So are there some ideas that he could very well be running for president? And then my final question is, what do you think is going to happen with the Maryland legislature? Do you believe that they're going to overturn his veto?
Well, here's what I'll tell you. And having here in the state of California, having our legislature has actually passed a study bill, done a study, and is now attempting to put in place legislation to actually enact some of the recommendations that came out of that study. I can tell you first and foremost, the reason why he vetoed it is one of 2 things. Either he truly understands the consequences of doing the study, which is basically going to be one of the things that's going to come out of it is they're going to say, you need to write checks. And that's going to be a very, very big deal. It's going to be the exact same thing that came out of California. And the problem with that is that the state of Maryland, much like even the state of California, which has one of the highest GDPs and one of the biggest budgets in the entire country, it's going to be a check that the state in the end cannot afford to write, period. In this study, they're going to talk about all of the various different things. They're going to rehash history, which I guess in and of itself is not a bad thing in terms of understanding and helping the people of Maryland really understand and at least bring back to their memory what occurred during those times. But then the next thing is going to be trying to equate that to a dollar amount. And they're going to realize there is no dollar amount that is going to actually right that wrong. And there's especially not a dollar amount that the taxpayers of the state of Maryland are going to be able to afford. So the question is, did he do it because he realizes that's where it's going to go? Or is he simply saying, look, we already know because we've already seen what they did in California. We've already seen the study that they did. We've already seen what they've come up with. We need to now just jump ahead and start putting together legislation that's actually going to start cutting checks. That may be so it could be one or the other. And that kind of answers your second question, which is there something really kind of cynical? I think that Democrats, when you put forth a study bill, this idea of studying it, it's a delay tactic. And the worst part about it for them is it gets people's hopes up because people start thinking, hey, I might get a check. I might get a check. Here in California, they actually created a calculator where you could put in, okay, well, you know, how many of your ancestors, what percentage of your ancestry is African American, is black, that were former slaves, where did you live, how long did you live, yada, yada, yada. And you could figure out how much of a check you were supposed to get. And you can bet a lot of people went on that calculator.
Oh, sure. I have no doubt. Well, that's interesting, Craig. And let me interject here. Your practical, pragmatic, financial reality opposition to this bill, I think, is very justified, and I agree with you 110% on that. But let's step back from that, and let's say hypothetically that somehow we could come up with some type of calculation where the dollar amount was reasonable in terms of not breaking the budget, of providing reparations for slavery. Where would you stand on that?
Well, now the problem that you have is how do you determine? I mean, so how do you determine who gets what? And by the way, how do you determine who pays? I mean, what if I'm from an immigrant family that came to the United States? What if I'm an immigrant who just came to the United States? Right. I played no role in slavery. Why do I now, as a taxpayer, have to pay for the sins of those who came before me? If I live here and I'm white and my grandparents never owned slaves, nobody in my family ever owned slaves. Why do I now have to pay for slavery? Here in the state of California, we weren't even a slave state.
That's right.
So there was no slavery in the state of California. Why are we paying reparations for slavery when there was no slavery in the state of California?
More than that, let me give you, Californian, your props, because the first Republican nominee, who was actually more of an abolitionist than Abraham Lincoln, who would become the second Republican nominee for president, John C. Fremont, was from where? California. Not only was he from California, but he helped establish the state of California. A great man, actually.
Well, and then once again, but that it goes to show you how this is not about what happened. This is about a continuation of the victim mentality. In other words,
I agree with
by
you.
saying that you need reparations, it means that a wrong was done to you and it's still affecting you to this day. Now, I'm not saying that America is perfect. I'm not saying that all of America's sins have fallen behind them, but I look at where we were and I look at where we are. And you have to measure how far we have come, and you have to realize, number one, we're headed in the right direction. And you have to realize, number two, that the barriers that were in place before, my father was a World War II vet. My father he was a fully trained electrician, couldn't get a job when he got out of the Air Force. He wound up washing cars and working in a warehouse. He experienced whites only restaurants and whites only restrooms and drinking fountains. The barriers that he had to deal with, the obstacles that he had to deal with, the things that were roadblocks for him were barely speed bumps for me. And for my children, they're barely undulations. You know, I look at in my family how we went from no college graduates to half of my siblings are college graduates. Some of them with multiple postgraduate degrees. Most of us own homes where our parents, when they passed, didn't even own their own home. I look at generationally how we have succeeded and how we have grown and how we have prospered, and I realize this could have only happened here in America.
Craig, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's the untold story of Black America. The number of success stories and the number of us that, in spite of slavery past and segregation, were able to capture the American dream because of our dogged determination to capture the American dream.
Well, Niger, that's why it's called overcoming, because you overcome in spite of. If everything is easy, if everything were simple, then what have you really overcome?
Yeah, that's an excellent point.